todos. Muchas gracias y mucho gusto de poder estar aquí con ustedes. Mi nombre es Miguel Tomás, soy fundador y gerente del sello discográfico Miau Studios y en esta ocasión tengo el agrado de presentarles a Ronan Chris Murphy. Voy a presentar un poquito acerca de él y luego le voy a ceder la palabra para que comience esta charla que hemos preparado, esta masterclass. Siguiente, por favor. Ronan Chris Murphy es un productor estadounidense, es un productor musical e ingeniero de grabación con más de 30 años de experiencia en la industria musical internacional. Aquí en pantalla pueden ver algunos de sus créditos. Ha trabajado con artistas y con bandas de renombre como Aurora, King Crimson, Steve Morse, War, e inclusive con géneros diversos, como se ve aquí con Chucho Valdes y el grupo Iraquere. Siguiente, por favor. También Ronan ha tenido una participación importante en la industria de los videojuegos al trabajar en las bandas sonoras de videojuegos como Mafia III y Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Y quizás uno de sus créditos más resaltantes en los últimos años ha sido que Ronan masterizó la banda sonora de la película Get Out. Es una película que ganó un Oscar. Entonces, la charla que vamos a presentar el día de hoy se llama Five Tips to Elevate Your Mixes y espero que la disfruten mucho y les pido que se queden hasta el final, que vamos a tener novedades que estoy seguro les van a interesar. Muchas gracias y quedamos con Ronan.
I'm very happy to be here, and we just have a short period of time, so I'm going to try and share as much information as I can in this short period of time. And what I want to talk about today is the power of taking things away in a mix and a production. Because normally we think when we want to make a production more interesting or bigger or more powerful, we many times want to add more things and add more things. In reality, many times this is the wrong thing to do because in reality, sometimes adding and adding and adding more things will actually take us the opposite direction of what we're trying to do. So the bells will stop in just a few seconds. So one of the things that we want to be very careful of, and something that experienced producers and mixers understand, is that you have to look at a mix and you have to look at a production in what we call a holistic way, where we look at the whole production, the whole mix together. Because many times we'll think, oh, I want the guitar to sound a certain way. So we make changes, EQ, reverb, compression, other things with the guitar, and we think, oh, that sounds great. And then we move to something else. The difference that the very experienced professional mixers will do is they will make a change to the guitar sound and then listen to everything. Because when you make the change to the guitar sound, does my vocal sound better or worse? Do my drums sound more clear or less clear? So it's very important to always be thinking about what is happening to the entire mix and the entire production when you make choices about changing things or adding things or taking things away. And so what I'm going to do here, this is a song by a friend of mine named Dave Nachmanoff, and we did a record together many years ago. And I'm gonna show you a couple examples with this production. And hold on, it's the time of day for a lot of church bells. I'm gonna close the window. So yes, if you didn't hear the beginning, I'm here at my place in central Italy. Lots of churches and lots of church bells. So here we have this production, a rather simple production, and Dave Nachmanoff is kind enough to let me use it. And what I'm going to play for you, just for a few seconds, is this mix. And the only effects on the mix are there is a compressor on the lead vocal, and there is a limiter. And I only have the limiter here just to keep the levels for the Zoom broadcast kind of consistent. So here it is with no effects. And when we recorded, there's some compression on the bass, and there was 2 dB boost at 12K on the guitars.
Steven seems to know how to calm down.
And I just want to show you one thing really quick that's very important, is you'll notice when that the levels are not really high. We don't have enough time to talk about this in detail, but I never record with high levels. And my advice is that you never ever record anything with high levels. So I try to record with my peak levels being about -10 dB full scale. And I could easily spend 3 hours talking about why, but just trust me on this one. But I want to show you a couple things very quickly. So our drums right now that we have are just overheads and a kick drum. We have a tambourine, bass, organ, and 2 guitars, both mono, left and right. And then some vocals and some other things that play a little bit. But let's listen again to about 15 seconds of this.
Steven seems to know how to calm her down. Handling China, walking on.
That doesn't sound bad, but what I want to show you is what happens if we take away the organ. So the organ is a big it's a digital copy of a Hammond B3 organ. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the organ. And when that goes away, try not to listen to the change in the organ, but try to listen to how everything else changes. When I'm going to turn the organ off and on, listen to how the vocals sound different. Listen to how the guitars sound different. Listen to how the drums sound different.
Steven seems to know how to calm her down. Handling China, walking on eggshells, most of the time. He treats her gently.
What I hope you heard was that when we take away the organ, everything becomes more clear. There's more depth in the mix, but we hear the guitar parts better. We hear the chords in the guitar better. There's more clarity from the voice. So there's all these different things. So of course, I'm not saying that when you're mixing a record that you should turn off the organ. This was a great musician and very glad to have him on the record. But when you're making those decisions about production, you always have to remember that when we add something, it always, many times has a downside. So there's a positive thing to adding, but there's many times a downside like that. So obviously we would want to keep the organ in there. And what I would do is I would use EQ to maybe make it smaller and have its own space in the mix. But for right now, I'm going to play it one more time, and then I'm just going to leave it turned off because we're on a short schedule.
Steven seems to know how to calm her down. Handling China, walking on eggshells, most of the time. Treats her gently, she thinks she'll meet him.
Yeah, so the organ is a nice sound, but it takes away from everything else. So we always have to make those decisions. It's the same. Making music is like cooking. You know, you can add a lot of different ingredients, but when you add more and more different flavors, you lose a little bit of the tastes and the flavors that were already in the food. So it's a lot like that. So be very careful about what you add, and when you decide to add a second guitar or a fifth guitar or a new keyboard or any other, or a string section, always be thinking about, okay, this is a cool thing that we've added, but did it make everything else better or worse? I'm going to show you a thing very quickly about another way that we can cut things away to make other things sound more interesting. And the term we use in English is masking. So masking, and I'm sure there's some equivalent in Spanish, but masking is when one sound in a mix covers up clarity in other parts of the mix. And so what I'm going to do here now is I have these guitars here. And normally these guitars are each on their own track, but I put them together onto one stereo track just to make this demonstration easier. But what I'm going to do is this. I'm just going to cut off the low end of the guitars in the mix. And obviously the sound of the guitars will change, but more importantly, I want you to listen to how everything else in this mix is going to change. Oops, sorry, let's do that with the band.
Steven seems to know how to calm her down, like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. He treats her gently, she thinks she'll keep him round. She's a fragile thing.
So I hope everybody heard that. So what I hear, and hopefully you hear this too, is when we reduce the low frequencies on the guitar, we get more clarity on everything else. The bass drum is stronger. When there's the low one on the guitars, the bass just sounds like boom, 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 playing a very simple part. But this is a great bass player. He played for many years with a great American artist named Jason Mraz. But he plays very interesting parts. And when we take away the low frequencies on the guitar, we hear the actual part that the bass player plays in a better way. We hear the kick drum clear. And the great thing is the guitars don't sound worse. Maybe they even sound better. Let's try it again.
Steven seems to know how to calm her down, like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. He treats her gently, she thinks she'll keep him round.
So we might have cut off a little bit too much low end, but not too much. Let's listen to that soloed, because this might sound terrible soloed, but it sounds pretty good in the mix. Yeah, that sounds very thin and weak by itself. But let's put it back with the band.
How to calm her down, like handling China.
So hopefully you heard that when we put the full band, which has bass guitar and everything in there, the guitars start to sound fuller and more rich because we hear everything holistically in terms of how it goes together. There's one last thing I want you to listen to as we do this. Listen to see if the let's see. So let's listen to see if when we take the low end away from the guitars, do the guitars feel more stereo? So do they feel like they maybe are a little in the middle of the mix? And when we take away the low end, do you hear them getting wider?
Steven seems to know how to calm her down, like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. He treats her gently, she thinks she'll.
So I hope you heard that. The reason this happens is because low frequencies are omnidirectional. They kind of go everywhere. So we hear low frequency things as kind of mono, and high frequencies are directional. So we actually hear high frequencies from a specific place. So when we take away the low frequencies from the guitar, we take away the frequencies that feel very mono. And we're left with the high frequencies, which localize. So they have more of a stereotype feel to them. So it's a very, very powerful way. So one of the things you'll find is if you start to go in and take away a lot of the low frequencies on things that you don't need, your mix will automatically sound wider and more exciting without having to use any kind of crazy stereo widener plugins or anything like that.
Steven seems to know how to calm her down, like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time.
And so I want to take just a minute to take a look at all of the processing that we've done so far in this mix. The only processing we've done is we have reduced low end from the guitars, we have compressed the voice, and we have a limiter on the end. So very little, and that's not to say that I'm an incredible person, but we did take time to make sure that we recorded well. And there's not a lot fancy on here, but we made sure that the guitar sounded really good, that we put the microphone in the right place, that we had all of the musicians play the right kind of part for the kind of record we're wanting to make. And if you do that, mixing actually becomes very, very easy. Okay, so I want to show you another thing about how powerful it is to cut frequencies. Oh, I just opened the window, and of course it's time for the bells every 15 minutes. We'll only get 9 hits. All right, so I'm going to put a little bit of low end back in the guitar here.
Walking on eggshells.
And I'm going to show you a really powerful trick that that we use a lot for the lead vocals. So obviously, with many kinds of music, styles of music, the lead vocals are the most important part, or at least a very, very important part. But there is a problem. So sometimes we want to mix vocals very loud, and you'll really hear this, especially music from Latin America and Southern Europe, like in the 80s and the 90s, vocals are mixed very loud. It's not as much the case now. Most styles of music for pop and rock and disco and salsa or anything like that, anything where you really want to feel the music, whether it's dancing or heavy metal, we want to actually try and mix the vocal as low as we can in the mix. But of course, we want people to hear the vocal well. And the reason we mix the vocal low is that people will adjust how they listen to music based on the level of the vocal. So if our vocal is very high, people will turn the vocal down to a comfortable level. If the vocal is very low, people will turn up the music till the vocal is a very comfortable level. And so in the first situation with a very loud vocal, when we turn the vocal down to a comfortable level, we turn the music down. So it makes that heavy metal record or that dance record or traditional rhythmic record less powerful. So we're always looking for ways that we can mix the vocal as low as possible and still be able to hear the melody, to hear the lyrics. And so I'm going to show you a really cool trick that we can do. Obviously, compression is a really important tool for being able to have clear vocals when they're low in their mix. But a really important thing is to actually try and find frequencies that are fighting against the vocal. So there's a really cool trick, and we're going to do this with the guitars, but you could do this also with synthesizers. You could do this with an orchestra, anything, a piano, organ, any kind of sounds. So the trick is, I've just put another EQ on the guitars, and I just used a second EQ because it makes it easier for the demonstration. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a middle frequency that I can boost and that I can move around. In English, we call this sweeping back and forth. And what I'm going to do is it's going to change the sound of the guitars, but I don't really care about that. What I'm going to do is I'm trying to listen to find out what the guitar sound, this guitar boost, does to the voice. And I'm going to move it around until it does the most damage to the voice, either makes the voice sound bad, but more importantly, is there some place where the vocal really starts to feel like it goes away or gets covered up? So let's try this.
She's a fragile thing, complicated angel, with the heart of glass, checkered past, you must be careful. She's a fragile thing, this fragile thing will break your heart. She's a fragile thing, but this fragile thing will break your heart.
Yeah, when I boost there, I feel like the vocal is less close to me. So obviously that sounds terrible. But what we're going to do is we're going to take that same frequency that we boosted now. I'll make this a little bit wider. And we're going to cut it. And what we're going to listen for is we're going to try and see if, when we do this cut on the acoustic guitars, is it going to make our vocal more clear?
She's a fragile thing. Steven seems to know how to calm her down. Like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. Treats her gently, she thinks she'll keep him round. She's a fragile thing, complicated angel, with the heart of glass, checkered past, you must be careful.
So I hope everybody heard that. And that's just one little place where we did a cut and the vocal became more clear. We can hear the lyrics better. We can hear the character of his voice. And I might even try just for, usually one frequency is enough, but I'm going to just try one other frequency.
Steven seems to know how to calm her down. Like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. Treats her gently, she thinks she'll keep him.
Yeah, so we'll do this one other little cut here. And let's see if our vocal gets louder without turning it up.
Steven seems like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. He treats her gently, she thinks she'll keep him round. She's a fragile thing, a complicated angel, with the heart of glass, checkered past, you must be careful.
And hopefully the other thing you heard, aside from it just becoming more clear and more easy to understand, is the voice actually sounds more natural. So with those big guitars in there, the voice actually sounds fat in not a cool way, and not clear, and a little bit like he's singing with his hand over his mouth. And when we go ahead and take away those frequencies, all of a sudden the voice just becomes very clear. So
Like handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. her gently. She thinks she'll weep.
And while I do this, we were trying to do this to take care of the voice, because for this kind of music, the voice is so important. But I'm going to play back the same demonstration. And what I want to you to listen to is listen to the voice, but then also listen to the drums. Do the drums become more clear and more powerful? Do other parts of the mix become more interesting or have more clarity?
Handling China, walking on eggshells most of the time. He treats her gently. She thinks she'll meet him round. She's a fragile thing, complicated.
Yeah, the snare drum becomes more clear, and the snare drum becomes more clear. We can hear the notes and the melody of the bass in a more interesting and more powerful way, and the mix becomes more interesting and more three-dimensional. And so one of the things about this is, again, always to look at things holistically in the whole picture. And when I start a mix, whether I'm doing orchestral music for a soundtrack in a film or a heavy metal band or pop music, I always begin my mix by going in and trying to find these problems. I'm trying to do subtractive EQ to find out how much I can cut away in different instruments to make everything sound better. Most of the time, when you cut things in a mix, it usually helps other parts of the mix become more clear and have more detail so you can hear the parts better. And so I'm always starting to do that. So I begin my mix doing a lot of what we call subtractive EQ, cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting until that sounds, we get the mix sounding as good as possible. And actually the next thing I'll do is start adding compression and any other kind of dynamics, and then usually more subtractive EQ in there. And it's really important when you're building the mix, when you're building the foundation of the house of a mix, that you try to fix these problems and do subtractive EQ to make everything fit together really well. And once the mix already sounds good and powerful, then you can start to add reverb, add delay, boost frequencies to make things more exciting. But the really important thing is to keep everything in a holistic idea and picture. So the first one is the idea of layering many details and instruments, which many modern productions do. What you see a lot with layering is that they are many times using multiple layers to create one instrument. So, because in reality, you listen to a lot of big pop records, and it sounds like only a few things. You say you could easily make this on a 8-track or 16-track recorder. But many times what they will do is they will have one bass drum or kick drum part, but they might put 5 or 10 kick drums to create that one sound. Or many times with vocal stacks, there will be a vocal harmony, and they might record that harmony 10 times, but it creates one instrument. So that's the thing that you find when there's layers and layers. It's many times layers of the exact same thing that create one big instrument. Because most successful productions in almost any kind of popular music, for pop, rock, and things like that, don't have lots and lots of things happening. So that's when you hear that on big pop productions, that's what's happening. They're creating one big sound from many different layers. But obviously, there are certain things like orchestras where there will be many different things happening in a time, and also a lot of rhythmic music where there'll be a large percussion ensemble. But mostly that's it. They're creating one sound from multiple layers. So it still is like one synthesizer part. If there's, and by the way, I only see how do we achieve that one instrument sound in our own mixes? Okay, so one of the things to create that one instrument sound is that things have to be perfectly lined up together. So many times in a modern pop production, the synthesizer part, for example, is a MIDI performance. So they can have the MIDI perform the exact same performance with 5 different synthesizer sounds. And in a lot of times with vocals, there's a program called Vocal Align. And so sometimes on a big record like Katy Perry or something like that, they might record her voice 10 times, but then they will use this to automatically align them to be exactly in sync with each other. So it sounds like one big voice. When you create lots of layers, like when you do 8 guitar performances, every guitar performance is a little bit different. And that makes the, what we call the transients, that beginning sound, like from the hit, it makes them not clear. It smears them, reduces articulation when every hit is a little bit different. So what the pop producers are doing when they create one instrument from a lot of things is using a MIDI performance to play multiple samples, the exact same performance, or they're using technology tools, usually vocal line, to align them so that every hit begins and ends at the exact same time.
Pero va a ser un recording bootcamp de 6 días muy interesantes, donde se va a enfocar desde la preproducción hasta la masterización. Y sobre todo recalcando cosas muy importantes como las técnicas de microfonía, la grabación en sí. Vamos a hablar mucho sobre la compresión, sobre los procesadores, con el objetivo de mejorar tus grabaciones y llevarlas a otro nivel. Y también poder explicarte bien y para que tú puedas entender todos los procesos que logran que vayas a hacer mejores producciones en el futuro. Siguiente, por favor. Este bootcamp, que va a durar 6 días, va a constar en los 2 primeros días, van a ser todo lo que es teoría de la grabación, se va a hablar del flujo de trabajo, del cual se aconseja para que ustedes puedan realizarlo, para que hagan su producción de la mejor manera. Y también se va a hablar sobre los procesadores dinámicos, sobre los compresores. El tercer y cuarto día ya nos vamos a enfocar más en la grabación. Se va a grabar batería, bajo, guitarras, dirección de sesionistas. Y los últimos 2 días van a ser dedicados a la mezcla y sobre todo a deducir, a poder explicar muchas dudas que pueden tener ustedes cuando han mezclado. Entonces, de esa manera van a poder mejorar en sus mezclas. Todo este programa, siguiente, todo este programa tiene un costo, pero debido a que ustedes están en la charla Ritmo y también para los estudiantes de PMA, les estamos haciendo un súper descuento que es desde el precio regular de $500, les estamos ofreciendo un descuento de $350, que realmente es bastante, y esto les va a permitir de que puedan acceder a este gran bootcamp. Y sí, sería genial que todos puedan participar, que todos estén presentes y que puedan adquirir esta posibilidad de estar en la charla de Ronan, en el bootcamp, que va a ayudar mucho para sus futuras grabaciones, sus futuras producciones. Esta promoción va a ser hasta el 31 de agosto. Recuerden, es para los asistentes de ritmo y también para los estudiantes de PMA. Es bastante la oferta y en caso que sea para el público en general, va a ser de $450 y ya después, a partir del 1 de septiembre, ya va a ser el costo regular de $500. Siguiente. Bueno, como les contaba, nosotros como Miau Studios ofrecemos distintos servicios y entre ellos está la producción de videoclips, también hacemos gestión de redes sociales, hacemos producción musical, asesoría legal y Para los asistentes de ritmo y también para los estudiantes de PMA, les tenemos un beneficio que es un descuento exclusivo del 10% en todos nuestros servicios, ya sea si necesitan un videoclip, si necesitan una producción musical, si necesitan asesoría en redes sociales, les damos este descuento del 10%. Así que aprovechen, todos los asistentes de hoy pueden comunicarse, ahí está el número y ahí está el correo, para que se comuniquen con nosotros y puedan acceder a esta promoción para tener uno de nuestros servicios. Y también recordarles que aprovechen esta promoción de los $350 para que puedan participar del bootcamp de Ronan, que va a estar buenísimo, que va a llevar sus producciones a un siguiente nivel. Así que bueno, esperamos que puedan contactarse con nosotros y se animen a participar de este bootcamp. Muchas gracias y muchas gracias a Ronan por habernos ofrecido esta linda clase.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronan. Gracias, chicos.
¿Sabes todo lo que puedes hacer con Melodyne? Editar, afinar, cuantizar, mezclar y crear. En este curso de Melodyne aprenderemos. En el primer módulo conoceremos la importancia de afinar y aprenderemos a configurar correctamente el programa para lograr los mejores resultados posibles. En el segundo módulo aprenderemos a utilizar las herramientas de selección, afinación, modulación y formante. En el tercer módulo utilizaremos las herramientas de amplitud, manejo de tiempo, separación de audio y macros para mejorar otros aspectos de la interpretación. En el cuarto módulo exploraremos algunas funciones extras de Melodyne. En el quinto módulo crearemos armonías a partir de una sola voz, logrando un arreglo musical mucho más atractivo. En el sexto módulo elaboraremos transiciones de notas, formantes y amplitud, corrigiendo además el tiempo entre dos voces. En el séptimo módulo aprenderemos a afinar otros instrumentos como bajo, una trompeta, una guitarra. En el octavo módulo, ustedes desarrollarán ejercicios para practicar la afinación y edición de una voz, un bajo y una guitarra. Soy Esteban Albán y te enseñaré a usar Melodyne como todo un profesional. Nos vemos en clase.
¿Te has preguntado alguna vez cuánto dinero mueve la industria musical? Solo en Latinoamérica, la industria de la música grabada generó más de $1.300 millones en el último año. Según el presidente de Warner Music, el caso de Latinoamérica es una historia de éxito sin precedentes, debido a que ha triplicado sus cifras en los últimos 5 años, siendo la región de mayor crecimiento a nivel mundial. Hola, soy Pedro Cayán, director de PMA, y quiero contarte cómo nuestro máster en producción musical te ayudará a ser parte de una de las industrias más importantes de la economía mundial actual. Para este máster, nuestra metodología Creatividad con Técnica está conformada por 4 líneas de aprendizaje que te permitirán certificarte en producción musical digital, producción de beats, pop harmony y music business. Para garantizar tu experiencia, contamos con laboratorios totalmente equipados, nuestra propia plataforma de cursos grabados PMA Play, aula virtual, biblioteca, asesorías, eventos y una red de contactos con profesionales de la industria musical nacional e internacional. Si te apasiona la producción musical y quieres saber más de nosotros, visítanos en pma.edu.pe y lleva tu talento mucho más lejos. Nos vemos en clase. En la actualidad, muchos artistas han desarrollado sus producciones musicales desde casa, logrando posicionar su música en distintos países del mundo. ¿Cómo lo lograron? Hola, soy Pedro Cayán, director de Pro Music and Art, y quiero contarte cómo con una formación de calidad lograremos potenciar tu talento para que alcances tus objetivos musicales. Nuestra malla curricular está diseñada de manera estratégica, integrando cursos de producción, composición, armonía, music business, que te convertirán en un profesional mucho más competitivo en la industria musical. Podrás poner en práctica los conocimientos adquiridos desde el primer día de clases, acceder a charlas, eventos componentes de la industria musical internacional y así ampliar tu red de contactos y mejorar tus oportunidades laborales. Si te apasiona la música y quieres saber más de nosotros, visítanos en pma.edu.pe y lleva tu talento mucho más lejos. Nos vemos en clase.
¿Conoces el DAO más popular en la industria musical? Aprende a utilizar profesionalmente Pro Tools, el software líder en el mercado, que te permitirá grabar, crear, mezclar y masterizar tus proyectos más ambiciosos a una calidad impresionante. Soy Leo Coronel y conmigo aprenderás todo lo que debes saber acerca de Pro Tools. Aprenderás todas las funciones y herramientas, atajos para crear música de manera sencilla, rápida, pero sin descuidar la calidad. En el primer módulo repasaremos todos los aspectos básicos del programa y su más óptima configuración. En el segundo módulo crearemos nuestra primera sesión. Empezaremos con el ruteo básico. En el tercer módulo realizaremos grabaciones vía audio y MIDI. En el cuarto, quinto y sexto módulo aprenderemos a utilizar las herramientas de edición que tiene el programa. Editaremos una pista de audio instrumental e iniciaremos con la edición vocal. Y haremos un especial énfasis en este último punto, ya que la voz es el instrumento más importante dentro de una canción. En el séptimo módulo mejoraremos y realizaremos grabaciones a través de la mezcla. Y finalmente en el octavo módulo organizaremos nuestro proyecto y lo prepararemos para exportarlo de forma profesional hacia la última etapa llamada masterización. ¿Y tú qué esperas para volverte un profesional en Pro Tools? Nos vemos en clase.